Hi, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Mike Setzer. I'm a genetic counselor at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the NIH. And today I plan on speaking with you all about whole genome sequencing and genetic counseling specifically for individuals and families with X and Y variations, and particularly what's available at the National Institutes of Health. So the first thing I'd like to acknowledge is that I work as part of a team. So what you're seeing here is the members of the Centralized Sequencing Initiative, which is the name of our study, the name of our protocol. And if you're listening and you've actually been one of the families we've already spoken to or reached out, some of these names may seem familiar, and so you're able to put some pictures with the names, but I'm very fortunate to work with some really excellent genetic counselors, molecular geneticists, and fellows that help coordinate our appointments. So a little background about why I'm speaking to you all today. So I work, as I said, on the Centralized Sequencing Initiative. We're a protocol that started back in 2017. And originally, we were working just with individuals and patients who came to NIAID, the Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, in order to be a centralized hub for all of the genetic testing done for that institute. Since 2017, we've been quite busy. We've completed genetic testing for over 2,000 individuals, and that includes patients and their families. And we've spoken to over 4,000 individuals. So in the 4 years we've been around, we've developed quite a bit of experience. More recently, and more relevant to all of you, we've collaborated with Dr. Rosnahan. You may all be familiar with Jonathan Blumenthal, who's as part of his team, to offer genetic sequencing for you all via the National Institutes of Mental Health. And broadly, and I'll get into a little more detail about this, but the reason is for us to learn more about the variation and the variability that we see in individuals with X and Y variations. So this slide is my attempt to try and describe using visuals sometimes the difference between the communication and what we can get on the medical side of things and what you all understand as yourself and your family. So I think sometimes when we give someone a medical diagnosis or when we think about someone in the medical model, things can look quite black and white. So individuals with XXY have these features, individuals with XYY have these particular features, and I think sometimes it doesn't capture the richness that can actually occur. So of course, as you know, just through your lived experience, you're a unique person. You're not just a list of symptoms and features, and of course, everyone with X and Y variations are different and are impacted in a different way and lead their own unique life. And there's lots of reasons for that. But one way that we're interested in learning more about that is seeing, well, how much does a person's genetics or DNA contribute to this really rich difference? Of course, genetics is only one part of it, but it is one of the easier ways we can look at the differences between the people in our study. So let's say you're interested in learning more about this genetic sequencing study. And so I've broken it down into 3 main modules of what's required. I should note, though, that first you must already be enrolled in the study with NIMH. So at this point in time, we can only work with participants who are already enrolled on that study and then referred to us. But if you're already there, the three main steps of this study include, first off, speaking with someone like me, a genetic counselor. If you decide to move forward with this study, we'll take a sample and we'll do the actual testing. And then to finish up, we'll discuss your results and talk with you about those results. So let's break this down. So what's going to happen during that initial conversation? Well, a couple of things. So mainly, we'll give you information about the study, what we're doing, why we're doing it. Some of the information will be covered today, but the conversation that you'll have will be more personalized and more detailed. We'll talk about the different risks of the study and the limitations, and also how it might benefit you and your family. We will collect information about your family history. So as genetic counselors and genetics professionals, we're very interested in thinking about a person's family and how that might influence their health. And then I've also put this last bullet, the opportunity for person-centered genetic counseling. And I want to talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. So I recognize most of you, many of you have probably already had genetic counseling, have probably met with a genetic counselor before. And so maybe some of this will be review, but I just want to emphasize that, and maybe refresh some of you about what genetic counselors do. So I think we can be useful for individuals and their family. And what we do as genetic counselors is we provide information, generally biomedical in nature, in a way that makes sense to you and to your family. But we should also be able to address any relevant questions and concerns you have related to social and psychological well-being. So on this slide, I've pulled some questions that I've heard from my conversations with families. And maybe some of these resonate with you, maybe all of them do, maybe none of them. And this is not certainly meant to be an exhaustive list of questions you might have, or a minimum. So I put these here simply as an example of what we can talk about. If you just want to stick with the information about the study, that's okay too. But I want to be clear that if desired, if these feel relevant to you, these are some questions that can come up and you can discuss with us as well. And then lastly, of course, is decision making. So genetic counselors are adept at helping people make decisions. And of course, I want to emphasize that the decision to participate in this study is yours and yours alone. So it's certainly not required. If you are part of the NIMH study, this isn't required as part of your participation with them. It is up to you. So let's say that you've gone through the conversation with a genetic counselor and you've decided at this point in time that you'd like to proceed. So what we would need from you is some sort of sample in order to do the actual DNA testing and DNA sequencing. Normally, the sample is blood or saliva. For most people, it will be saliva, and that can just be collected via a kit sent in the mail. You're not required to come into the NIH. And then once we get your sample, we actually perform the genetic sequencing or the genomic sequencing. And I've got a figure here to try and help explain what do I mean by that when I say genetic sequencing. So here we've got a picture of a chromosome, which I imagine most of you are familiar with chromosomes. So they're in all of our cells and contain our genetic information. But if you take a closer look, if you unravel the chromosome in a way, you'll get the individual DNA letters. So as you can see in the cartoon, they break it down to T, G, C, and A. And those letters just represent different chemical chemical bonds that we know are in the DNA. And so what we do with genomic sequencing is we unravel all of a person's chromosomes and sequence all of their DNA. It's a big test. We generate lots of data with this. And so it is quite in depth. And then once we actually get the DNA sequence, we do an analysis for things called variants with the use of a computer. There'd be no way to do this by hand. And so I've tried to put here an example of what I mean by a DNA variant. So essentially what that is we take the DNA sequence that we sequenced for you or your family member, and we compare it. So we have a big database of genomic sequences from people from all sorts of different ancestral backgrounds. And we say, okay, what's different in our person that from the reference? And those differences, so in this little box here, there's a C instead of what's a G in the reference, and we label that a variant. And the fact is that everyone who does this test will have thousands of variants. Humans are rich in genetic diversity, and the sequence itself is very long. So we will always find lots and lots of variants. Most of them are normal. Most of them do not cause disease. But it's our job to essentially see if any of them do. And so in terms of what happens with that sequence, so we do the genomic sequencing, and I should also mention we do a chromosomal test called chromosomal microarray. And we do that just to confirm the X and Y variation in all of our participants. But once we get that data, it goes to two different institutions. So one set will go to the team at NIMH so they can help develop their research questions about how DNA can contribute to the variability in what we see in our individuals with X and Y variation, and also just general, what is the DNA background of our participants. And then some of it will stay with us at NIAID, and we'll do a clinical analysis where we ask, okay, is there anything here in the genome sequence or in the microarray that's related to some sort of medical condition or symptoms that's present in the participant? And is there anything that might put them at risk for an actionable disease in the future? And so those stay with us, and that's the analysis that we do at NIAID. So let's talk a little bit about results. So results are called back to participants if anything is found. And the turnaround time can vary. It's usually around 9 months. We're hoping to get that to be a little bit quicker, but that's about average for the time people get results from when we get a sample. And of course, many people ask, well, what can I learn? What are the types of results I can get back? So the first thing I want to say is most participants will not have a positive finding on their genomic sequence, besides the confirmation of their X and Y variation. So when we do the microarray, we will confirm that diagnosis. But most individuals don't have a genetic variant that contributes greatly to disease. It's just not something that's common. So most people who participate will likely not learn anything new about their genetic background. Some participants might learn that they have a DNA variant that's related to their clinical symptoms. So to give an example, if someone, in addition to their X and Y variation, perhaps had seizures or epilepsy, and if we found a genetic variant that seemed to be associated with that or caused that, that's something we would return back to the family. So that's an example of something related that you could learn. And then some people will learn that they have a DNA variant that puts them at risk for an actionable disease. And so what I mean by actionable disease is we have a list of conditions that are generally related to either hereditary cancer risk or hereditary heart conditions. And these come with specific recommendations that an individual can implement to help prevent the condition from happening or to expand their lifespan. And these are generally not common. We find these in about 2% of our participants. So it is possible. Of course, we talk about it with everyone, but generally not likely to be found in any one person who does the test. So I wanted to bring up one risk or consideration that's come up with some of the families that I've already spoken to about this sequencing, and that's the idea of genetic discrimination. Or using genetic information against an individual. So if you're a US citizen or live in the United States, there is federal law called GINA that prohibits employers or health insurance companies from discriminating based on your genetic information. They are not allowed to ask, but that's all it covers. So that leaves everything open to technically asking if you have a genetic mutation or genetic risk. I will say some states, including California and Florida, have done extra legislation to cover additional protections, but that varies based on state. And just as a reminder, this really is only relevant if there's a positive finding. So if everything comes back normal, which is the most likely outcome, this isn't really a risk. It's only if we do find something. But of course, this is something we talk about in detail during the actual conversation. So let me review and summarize what I've spoken to you all about today. So in general, we are interested in learning about the richness and variability of individuals with X and Y variations, specifically through DNA sequencing. We'll have a conversation about it. So it's our job to go through the information, but also learn about you and see if there is anything that feels relevant or important for you that we might be able to help you with. We ultimately want the testing and participation to be beneficial to you. So if there's something we learn that could be of use to your health, we'll let you know. And of course, there are benefits and risks to consider, and we want you to make a decision that aligns with your beliefs and your values. So I want to thank you all for listening, for joining me today. I'll just say personally, it has been such an absolute pleasure speaking to the families that I've spoken to so far. I think I've talked to about 20 families, and just really appreciate the opportunity to work with you all. So happy to take any questions that you have at this time. Thank you.